Now, let me say a little something about an incident that occurred in Tennessee not long ago. We had State Representative Susan Lynn, who was talking about the possibility of nullifying health care legislation at the federal level by the states. And what do you think happened? Of course she was accused of supporting slavery. That's the pot calling the kettle black, right? She was accused of, in fact, let me read you, this is from the news item. Representative Mike Turner, chairman of the House Democrats Political Caucus, said Tuesday Representative Susan Lynn's comments harkened back to Civil War-era arguments. And these are his words. And see if you can make any sense out of it. It seems totally convoluted to me. He says, Susan Lynn is yearning for times gone by. Well, right, of course, we can't have that, right? 2010 is the best we could have. Maybe we could put the poor people back to sharecropping and slavery and let the people up at the big house have all the nice things. We've already had that fight about states' rights. Can you make head or tail out of what in the world the guy is even saying? I mean, I guess it's an insult because he mentions slavery. But look, what kind of a numbskull would you have to be to think that people support slavery today, right? I mean, like nobody actually thinks that. He's making an inane, idiotic comment like that because he thinks it's going to hurt this person's political career. This type of statement destroys people's careers. And the people uttering them are not stupid enough to believe them. I mean, let's give them that much credit. He doesn't believe this woman supports slavery, but he thinks if he just gets the word slavery next to Susan Lynn, he'll ruin her career. Well, thankfully, most Americans have IQs above 65. And so they don't go in for inane things like this. But think about this. We've already had that fight about states' rights. What does he mean by that? Does he mean that, well, we've fought about states' rights before, so now we all know that the best conceivable political arrangement is for our wise overlords in Washington to have all power and for us to have no input at the state level? That's been decided, and that is clearly the correct path to take. I mean, what is he saying when he says this? We've already had that fight about states' rights, and we've decided we shouldn't have any voice at all. I mean, what does this mean? I mean, how can you not hold this in contempt? And I realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't call the guy an idiot and this and that, but if we're dealing with somebody who just has an honest difference of opinion with us, well, that's fine. You know, we treat these people with courtesy. You know, we always treat people with respect. If somebody misunderstands our position, we correct them with kindness. But we're talking about somebody who's looking to just ruin people's careers and reputation. So yeah, I'm going to call this guy an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But if he's going to make this claim that nullification in some way is connected with slavery, I'm going to tell you a little story. And that little story takes place one night in March 1854 and involves a fugitive slave named Jonathan Glover, who had been taken into federal custody by a federal marshal on the grounds of having violated the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Now, a mob gathered in front of the jail where Jonathan Glover was being held. And a local anti-slavery newspaper editor named Sherman Booth took command of the crowd and urged them to storm the jail and release the fugitive slave, which they did. Well, Sherman Booth was arrested for having aroused the crowd into violating a federal law. So Booth was brought before a federal district court, but he applied for a writ of habeas corpus, and the Wisconsin State Supreme Court granted it to him and released him. The state Supreme Court declared the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 to be unconstitutional and void. Now, it's true, there is a fugitive slave clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2. But that does not mean that absolutely any action the federal government takes on behalf of the rendition of a slave is therefore constitutional. And in one of my books, 33 Questions, I actually talk about the constitutional objections to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. I don't have time to get into that tonight. Well, they let Booth go. So the same federal marshal arrests him again. This time he's found guilty of violating federal law. He's imprisoned and fined. But once again, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court releases him. Well, at this point, the U.S. Supreme Court demands that the Wisconsin State Supreme Court send it a copy of the case, a record of the case. The State Supreme Court refuses to do it. So it takes until March of 1857 before the U.S. attorney can get a copy of the case. I mean, this is when states actually had a backbone, you know, where they didn't feel like, oh, this has already been decided, our wise overlord. No, they're going to fight. And so they did. All right, December 1858, the U.S. Supreme Court demands that Sherman Booth be turned over to federal custody. The state Supreme Court again refuses to comply. 1859, the Wisconsin legislature, heartily approving of what its state Supreme Court has done, adopts a resolution in support of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1798 and the right of state nullification. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision, said the Wisconsin legislature, was, quote, without authority, void, and of no force. And then it went on to quote 2 paragraphs from the Kentucky resolutions of 1798. So if you're going to tell me that nullification supports slavery, you don't know anything about American history. Stop embarrassing yourself and shut up. Now, let's suppose this now, again, this isn't like the answer to all our problems, but my view is let's just try everything, right? Maybe something will work, right? It's not the answer to every problem. And in fact, we can probably expect some federal court to hand down its solemn opinion that we, who nullify federal laws, are not respecting the Constitution. Well, again, I would say this is the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, that would be rich, right? The federal courts telling us that we're not obeying the Constitution? I mean, come on. Right? I mean, these are bodies that have done absolutely zero over the past, well, at least since the 1930s, to stop the federal government from dismantling practically every restraint that the framers placed on it. And so when the people rise up to do something about this, that's what they're going to criticize? So if they issue a statement like that, if that comes out of one of the federal courts, as far as I'm concerned, you know what we should do? We should just nullify that too, to show that we're serious. Now again, one strategy would be, petition our elected representatives and wait for them to do something, and wait and wait and wait until our country is brought to ruin. Or, instead of watching helplessly as our government makes history at our expense, we can change the rules and make history ourselves. We in our states can begin the process of saying no, of reversing the process and the progress of the destructive Leviathan that has bankrupted us and threatens more of our liberties every day. I'm sure the federal government had no idea what it was going to get away with over the course of the 20th century. Well, now let's see what we can get away with, and maybe we'll surprise ourselves as much as they did themselves. And so, as I draw my remarks to a close, I want to make mention of a project that I've just started. I was just starting a book project. And I almost feel guilty imposing more books on the world. Like we don't have enough to read, right? But I can't stop myself. So anyway, I was working on one. And then in the middle of working on it, I decided to postpone it briefly. Because it occurred to me that given everything that's going on, it's so surprising. It's so shocking that there's this movement to actually do something on the state level. I decided instead that in the short run, I'm going to write a book, a little book. And it'll also have a one-word title. The one word is going to be nullification. And so about half of it will be, just me explaining it and going through the American history, showing how it has been threatened and used in the past, and the earth did not break free of its axis and go tumbling toward the sun. Things did in fact work. Go through this, show how it's being used today, how it can be used. And then in the second half, in addition to a couple of model state resolutions as examples, just so that when they try to criticize us or marginalize us, we'll put Thomas Jefferson supporting nullification, James Madison supporting nullification. I'm going to put all these documents in there. In fact, there's a pamphlet written by a judge and a federal cabinet member from the 1830s that smashes all counter-arguments and has not been reprinted since it first appeared in the 1830s. Now, if it supported federal power, you better believe we'd be studying it in school, and waving incense in front of it and bowing down. But, of course, it doesn't say the right thing, so no one's ever heard of it. So this was published in 1833. It's never appeared again. I'm going to put that in the book. We're going to resuscitate this stuff. So, so I'll make, this is supposed to be in stores mid-June, so I guess I better get cracking. But anyway, so the thinking is that this is an easy way. You can, look here, just look at this. explains what we're doing and why it's why it's a good idea, why it's as American as can be. And so probably at my various places where I blog or my tomwoods.com website, I'll be posting about that. But ultimately, what we're dealing with here is that I think a lot of us, we're the action-oriented type. We want to do something. Well, this is action. There you go. See? This is action we can take. I mean, let's employ every mode of self-defense that Thomas Jefferson put in our arsenal. Forget about waiting for our liberties to be handed back to us. As Lord Byron said, who would be free, themselves must strike the blow. Thank you.